Okay. So thank you all for attending. This is the second of 3 Lunch and Learn sessions. Today's session is on fund management and investing wisely. My name is Bill Crossan. I chair the Finance and Investment Committee for the Foundation. And I appreciate that all of you have taken time to join us today for this session. I think I already told you, Betty, I might have missed you in the process, but if you do want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we're using today, it is available on the Foundation website. So if you go to the Foundation website, click on the Lunch and Learn link, and then look for the June 16th event, you will see a link to the PowerPoint for today's presentation. So take advantage of that if you wish.
Great, thank you.
And I will share my screen and try to move it as each of the speakers use it. So hopefully you can see my screen. If somebody could give a thumbs up or something that says you can. Okay, thank you. Then we'll go from there. So I'm privileged today to be joined by 2 very qualified people to assist in this presentation. One, I think almost everybody knows is Lisa Mikulajic. Lisa has been the finance administrator for the church for the last 18 years or so. She is a Denver native. She has an accounting degree from Metropolitan State University at Denver. And in her personal life, she has 2 daughters, 2 grandsons. She is an avid reader, which I knew, but things I didn't know is she actually enjoys computers. I just thought she was good at them, but she enjoys them. And also horses, dancing, and movies. So always like when I'm allowed to see biographies, because I learn things about people that I didn't realize. So at any rate, thank you, Lisa, for your participation today. And the other person I think is known to most of us, and that's Michelle Soriano. And Michelle has been the investment advisor for the foundation for the last 3 or so years. She owns her own company, Castle Rock Investment Company, is an SEC registered investment advisor that is this year celebrating its 15th anniversary. So congratulations to Michelle on that success. Prior to starting her company, which was in 2006, she had a lot of experience with investment advisors like Ceridian, T. Rowe Price, and also held a number of positions in mortgage banking industry. She has a BS in applied economics from Hofstra University, and she's completed numerous leadership and other professional development classes. She has more acronyms around her name than most of us. We could publish that, and then you can play word games, try to make words out of her designations, but that might distract from the overall presentation. So she's also passed a lot of exams. Anybody who does investment advising has to pass all sorts of examinations to make sure they have appropriate credentials and are giving good advice. And she also volunteers in her free time. She volunteers for a number of not-for-profit organizations. And the one that I did not know, well, I didn't know about some of the volunteer activities, but the other one I didn't know is she is a certified yoga instructor, which my daughter is also, and I got to be the victim of her teaching. And I know that has to be the hardest job in the world, because in addition to doing impossible exercises, you also have to tell people what to do. And I find that remarkable. So at any rate, a little bit of background about both of our speakers. But thanks, Michelle and Lisa, for being here today and assisting with this. We, as I said at the beginning, we couldn't have 2 better qualified people to help us with this session. So, see if I can move this. The Karen Yeager is joining, so I'm going to give her a minute to join. So, and Karen, I don't know if you've joined, but if you have, thank you. And I'm sorry if I made you wait. I didn't see till just now that you were waiting. Thank you for joining. The second slide gives a little bit of information for those who were here last week. This will be a little bit redundant, but we are celebrating, as everybody knows, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Augustana Foundation this year. And when we set out to do this, we established for ourselves three objectives. We wanted to celebrate, that was number one, and acknowledge what this organization has been able to accomplish in its first 50 years. We wanted to grow the foundation, and we set an objective of $50,000, and I think most of you attended attended the celebration event for the 50 for 50 and saw that in that event we have gotten to nearly 60% of our goal for the year, which is a great start. But the other thing that we wanted to do was was educate, and these lunch and learn sessions were put together specifically for that purpose. So last week we talked a little bit about the gifts that we received and where they come from. And Greg Bickle provided some really excellent information about how to donate and things people might want to consider for both lifetime gifts and bequests and memorials and things like that. Today we're going to talk about how we take those gifts and invest them and generate investment returns from those gifts. And then next week, Tim Garrington will join me and we'll talk about then how the grant making process and how we determine the beneficiaries of the grants that we are able to give, and as well as figuring out how much money we're able to give away. So that's kind of what we're doing. It follows kind of an outline that Kari provided for us actually at the 50 for 50 celebration event. I thought she did a really nice job of capturing what the foundation does, and it's listed here on the slide under the third bullet there. We receive gifts, we invest the money from those gifts, and then we use that money to fund grants. And pictorially, you can see that on the third page of the PowerPoint. The money comes in, the funds are invested, and the grants are made. And as I said before, today we're going to focus on the funds are invested. And with that bit of introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who's going to lead us through kind of some background information and some general information about types of investments and investment vehicles and so on and so forth. So Michelle, I'll try to turn the slides. If you give me a heads up when you want me to turn them, I'll take care of it for you.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And thank you for all your work on this, of course, on the committee, but also on this presentation and putting this together. So just first, some of the basics regarding investing. On the screen, you can see different types of investments that are available for us to consider for investing the money for the foundation. Bonds is something we've been using quite a bit, probably since 2008, I think approximately. So a bond is simply a promise to pay on a date certain. So bond, let's say $100,000 bond, you invest it, you earn your dividends that are paid sometimes monthly, sometimes semi-annually. And then the bond matures at whatever the par value is. They're relatively safe if the issuer does remain in business and doesn't file bankruptcy. They're fairly safe. The bonds that were invested since in 2008 until about 3 years ago were all generally investment grade or triple B or above, good quality companies. Not a lot of upside on the bonds. It's nice because they're reliable. You're receiving your dividends. but the value of the bonds generally does not rise too much unless there's a significant change in interest rates. So stocks, as you know, the Congressional Council decided to invest some money in the stock market that represents ownership in a share of an organization. They may or may not pay dividends. Some companies pay dividends to their stockholders, some don't. A little bit more volatile though, as you know, with the stock market. Lots of changes just based upon the economy, pandemics, and the business themselves. And there are also, of course, alternative investments. So hedge funds, private equity, exotic real estate investments, they tend to be illiquid, meaning you would have to hold on to them for some required period of time. So not necessarily a good fit for the foundation, and introduces a level of complexity and expenses that the foundation is not willing to take on. And I think Bill is probably just helping his putting a note on his door. When you're ready, we can go to the next slide, Bill. Thank you. And regarding the investment vehicles themselves, so in the bonds, we do have individual bonds, individual investments, and those are nice because there's no ongoing expense. There's no expense fee because there's no management, because it's just simply purchasing an individual bond or an individual stock. And then if you pick the winners, you get all the winnings because you're not paying a manager. And they're predictable, especially for bonds. And the reason, though, mutual funds are used generally is that the fund managers have access to pricing that many of us don't. Also, with a mutual fund, because you're holding a basket of a number of different companies, whether it's stocks or bonds, you remove that risk that comes from just having a single issuer. And keeping track of the individual investments is time consuming and increases the volatility. So in the funds, on that last section on this slide, it shows that funds hold a variety of investments with different credit ratings, maturity dates, and other factors to achieve a stated objective. They are professionally managed, and it's an easy way to achieve diversification and mitigate the risk from this if you had just a single issuer risk. All right, the next slide, Bill. Great. So factors influencing the investment decisions. The cash flow for the dedicated ministry funds, the needs of the dedicated ministries is different than the cash flow of the foundation. The foundation is paying out grants based upon a formula, 3-year average return formula. So that's pretty consistent over time. So we know what our cash flow is going to be from the foundation each year. We determine that. The ministry funds, though, that does fluctuate. So their needs on how to invest are going to be different. So the funds that are the ministry funds have to be fairly liquid. I know there's large purchases. Some purchases.
Grilled cheese for a change, maybe?
I'm sorry? Is there? Oh, Karen, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So we do invest the funds differently, whether it's for the foundation or for the ministry funds, because the ministry funds have to be ready to be used by the ministry or liquid. And the need to diversification is a strategy, of course, to reduce risk. We've said that before, and maximize return by allocating across different types of investments, across different industries. So, for example, as you know, in the year 2020, there was basically 10 companies that made that big stock market return. Microsoft, Facebook, Zoom was a big mover, right? As we can all see, and Google. So, but long term, we want to make sure we're still investing in industrial and manufacturing and all those other areas. Now, the need to diversify also, you can't eliminate all the risk, but manage it as you diversify. So the objectives of the organization is designed to give away money. We're going to invest differently than an organization that provides services, because we know what our cash flow needs are, so we can, that's how we're going to invest, to match the liability of the grant. We shouldn't call it a liability, but knowing that we're going to make a grant for a certain dollar amount, we want to match our investments to make that ongoing in perpetuity. And the size of the organization, a small organization cannot afford a substantial loss, nor does it have the staff to dedicate to monitoring investments and investment decisions. So hence why I was hired to help with that and monitoring and reporting on the investments. So I think on our next slide, we're going to turn that over to Lisa, I believe. All right. Or did I do slide 7? I'm sorry.
It's my turn.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Michelle. So around 2017, or not around, in 2017, the council decided, because we were heavily invested for many years in the foundation in bonds, which as you can see from the outline, and as Michelle kind of went over a little bit, bonds are safe, considered safe. We did invest in corporate bonds mostly, and they were either all be rated BBB or better. You can pretty much count with bonds on obviously a set rate of interest, so that gives you less volatility in what we could calculate to give out as grants. And we laddered the bonds so that they would come mature in various time frames. That way we had liquidity. And so in the past, if you invest, you've known that bonds were really, for several years or many years, were up in the 5% or over. Well, in the last, I would say maybe 10-ish or so years, that has not been so much the case, and that is why the council decided it was time to consider diversification and broadening the capacity of the foundation to increase earnings. So what they did was they created an ad hoc committee, or requested an ad hoc committee to be formed. And that committee went out and requested, did what's called RFIs, and that's a request for information. Then they went out to various companies looking for what their proposals would be regarding diversification, what it would have looked like from past investing if we had been more diversified over that time frame. If they advise stocks, how would the strategy be for investing in stocks? And what were their fees to maintain the portfolio? They communicated with 14 churches, 2 universities, 1 seminary, and 2 Lutheran Family Services entities, as well as 2 mega funds. Some of those were the ELCA Foundation, which has a couple of funds. The one we were looking at was the ELCA Endowment Fund Pooled Trust. We also looked at the possibility of self-selecting index funds ourselves, without considering an advisor and what that might look like. We reached out to Michelle with Castle Rock Investment Company as a reference from Janet Egan, who had worked with her in the past. And we also considered, among those various ones, a Vanguard financial advisor. And what we got back from them is that there weren't foundations who invested really solely in bonds. More diversification was advised by the people we reached out to. And if they were invested in bonds, we found that it was quite frequently bond mutual funds, not just singular corporate bonds. So, okay, Bill, next slide. So the committee came back after doing their research and having meetings and talking to the various advisors that they contacted. And what they decided was that we should diversify our portfolio into equities over the next 36 months using dollar cost averaging, which dollar cost averaging is investing over time so that the volatility of your investment is less severe. And then the foundation should include asset allocation guidelines in the investment policy with target benchmarks. So they came up with the proposal to invest in equities anywhere from 25% of the portfolio all the way up to 70%. And that gives quite the broad range, but it also allows the investment committee to look at what's going on, especially consulting with an advisor, and to make appropriate changes in how much is invested in equities, depending on what the market tells us. So the committee also determined that we should engage an investment advisor if we deemed that to be prudent, which we obviously did. Hence, we hired Michelle in April, or no, February of 2019, I think, was it? Something like that. So we did do that. We felt that that was the most prudent, especially given the different things that are available in investing now. Hiring someone who had more experience with what those were, and so we did that. And then they decided also that the gift should be, we were for a while giving gifts based on income in the portfolio. Then we switched for about 4 years to a 4% value of net, or 4% of net asset value. But in 2016, it was determined to go back to investment income as the source of funding for the grants. And what they also decided was to calculate that investment income on a 3-year rolling average. So what that means is they take the past 3 years of income, divide by 3, and that's the amount that they give out for grants for that year. So hopefully I said that right. Okay, Bill. Next slide. Oh, sorry. I'm using a different screen with my notes on a slide. Sorry. Okay, so when we started out, as you can see from this slide, when we started out in December of 2019, we had like 1% in cash. We had in short-term bonds, which is 2 years or less, about 20%. Then in long-term bonds, we had almost 60%. The Mission Investment Fund, we had CDs, and that was something that the foundation had decided that it was a good investment for us because as a later slide shows, that the Isaac Bond Fund, the Mission Investment Fund is a financial ministry of the ELCA, and it provides investment vehicles for individuals, congregations, and social ministries. So the foundation people or investment community decided that that was something we should support, given that we are an ELCA congregation. The other thing that they do is provide seed money for new missions, which is obviously something we support as well. They offer loans for churches when they are going to do capital upgrades at reasonable interest rates. So building projects, land purchases, and refinances. And then the board decided that 2 to 5% of its assets should be invested in the mission investment fund. So we have done that as well into CDs. And then back to 2019, our equity investments were about 18%. So over the course of time, we started in March of 2019 through September 2020, and we invested $50,000 a month into seven mutual fund vehicles that Michelle suggested. And by the end of that time frame, well, actually, this one goes through March of 21. So now we are holding 14% in cash, 6% short-term bonds, 38% in long-term bonds, and we almost are, well, we've reached basically our mission investment fund amount of 5%, and our equities are now almost 40%, or by the end of March, they were almost 40%. So we're looking at our benchmarks, we're actually doing quite well in the goals that we wanted to reach in diversification. So that's good news. And then the next slide, which hopefully is, I think is my last slide. The dedicated ministry funds. For those that you that may not know, the dedicated ministry funds are particular funds that people have given money for particular causes. And so when someone gives a gift, sometimes they specify exactly who they want to use that gift. And even though we're kind of we venturing out of, you know, getting too specific about that, we do have I think seven dedicated ministry funds that people have given this money to, that the leaders of those ministries, along with some people from their committees, decide how to use those funds. And we ask them to look at what they've got and then to let us know what they predict over the next 2 years that they want to spend from those funds. And in that knowledge, we then know the short or long-term ranges to invest those funds. So we have capital improvement, the children and family, council discretionary, health, music, and senior ministry. And so you can see by this chart how those funds are broken down and how the investment has changed from the end of 20 to March of 21. And these funds, while they are assets managed by the foundation, they are actually owned by the ministries of the church. So that can get a little bit confusing, but just know that the church has asked the investment fund of the foundation, because of their more intricate knowledge about investing on a consistent basis, to invest those funds in a way that they can maximize earnings and still be used reasonably liquid when they're needed over the course of time by the ministries of the church. Hopefully, hopefully I've made a little sense. And back to Bill. Yay.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think Lisa covered most of the points on the next slide. There is some information here, and I might reference back to another slide, but the Isaac Bond Fund has been very good for us over the course of time. But we now find ourselves in a very interesting position. The average coupon rate of that fund is right around 5%. And it's weighted average duration, meaning when might it mature? Based on the the original way the bonds were set up, the average bond in that portfolio won't mature for another 5 years, which is what the second little starry diamond thing on that slide shows you. The interesting thing we've seen in the last 6 or 8 months is, as you all know, especially anybody that had bonds in their personal portfolio last year, when the pandemic hit in March, the bond market really deteriorated in terms of the returns that it could offer for new money. And so that's a long way of saying interest rates went down to almost zero, and bond rates went down accordingly. So because our portfolio yields 5%, and because many of the bonds in that portfolio are callable, meaning that at the discretion of the issuer of the bond, if they see a better opportunity in the market, they can call our bond and basically quit paying interest at 5% and reissue their bonds at 2 or 3%. And so many organizations are doing that. And if you think back to what Lisa said about our cash position at the end of March this year, it was very high. And our cash position at the end of May is also higher than we expected, because these companies keep calling the bonds as they get to their anniversary date. That's generally when they're callable, and they're reissuing at a much lower rate. So that's been something we've had to deal with, and it's been a bit of a challenge for us over the last year or so, and something that has been interesting. So if we show this slide again in 6 months, or certainly in a year, I bet the average coupon rate in this portfolio, instead of being 5%, will be quite a bit lower, because we will have to put some money into bonds as these things mature. And when we do that, the yield on those bonds is going to be much lower than what we've experienced in the past. So that's one of the realities of investing, and why we have people like Michelle who can help us step through these things and try to do so without making mistakes. But that was the only thing that I don't think Lisa covered on this page, and there was no way she was going to cover that, because it's happened very quickly in the last few, even most recently in the last month. So I think, Michelle, you were going to cover this last page, talk a little bit about, Lisa mentioned in her presentation that we did invest in a number of different common stock funds that are listed here on this page. And I think Michelle has some comments that will help us understand why we did it this way, and how we evaluate the performance of the portfolio. So I'll be quiet and let Michelle talk.
Thanks, Bill. So to fulfill the council's direction, I think it was a minimum of 25% of the foundation assets invested in equities by, I think it was, they wanted it done by April of 2021. So we were kind of given a timeline, and what the low bar was, what they wanted to accomplish. And so as both Lisa and Bill mentioned, we used a strategy of $50,000 a month going into equities. So for the equity portion of the foundation fund, I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes, just 7 investments, or 6 investments listed there. Actually, it might be 7. So it's a combination of course, domestic equities and international equities, and also a little bit in real estate. And so the funds, you could see there's some different performance on different categories. As you know, small caps were hurt quite a bit when we went into lockdown. Large domestic companies did the best actually in the year 2020. But as time moved on, our small caps have really popped back, and since the turnaround. And so the investments, thank goodness, because equity investments, we have good years and bad years. Thank goodness we've done really well so far with the equity investments. It's made things easier for us. As Lisa mentioned, we started in March 2019 and finished that up in September. We did just make one more recent purchase to put some of the cash to work and to hit the final benchmark for the 40% exposure to equity market, which is the benchmark listed in the investment policy statement. So as far as monitoring the fund, selecting what investments, there's a screening tool called FI360. They just simply take the raw data from Morningstar and put it through these quantitative tests. And if an investment fails any one of those tests, and the questions under quality, where it says investments are measured against 9 criteria, including regulatory oversight, organizational stability, minimum track record, expense ratio, and risk-adjusted performance relative to its peers. So large caps are compared to large caps, small caps to small caps. So we're apple-to-apple comparisons. If a fund fails any one of those tests, let's say a manager change happened, or or if the organization somehow, if there was any change in the organization whatsoever, it would get points against it, and then those points are totaled, and then it is compared against its peers. So we want kind of a low score. We don't want points against the investment. That's what the FI360 does. Kind of like golf, you want to keep the points down. Very low is good. And so as of March 31st, the overall fiduciary score was a 5 out of 100, so top 5th percentile. Overall, if we look at the dollars in each investment, this is just simply the equity portion. Remember, the dollars in the investment weighted upon its balance, the average score was in the top 5th percentile for the whole portfolio. So the link, though, to that methodology for the scoring is on the slide. So it's interesting if you like this kind of thing. Otherwise, it's a lot of detail. But the FI360 score, it helps us not favor too much investments that we're real familiar with. Make sure it's a great due diligence tool, provides reporting, and helps us with our process and procedures for investing the money. I think that's it, Phil.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Michelle. I should point out, Michelle had the easy job of figuring out which funds to invest in. I had the difficult job of counting how many funds we had, and I've corrected it now on the slide, but I apologize for my error. So I think that that covers our prepared piece to this. And so we'd be happy to take any questions at this point. I'll continue to leave the slideshow up in case we need to refer to it during the Q&A. But if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to hear them and try to address them if we can.
I'll go.
Thanks, Art.
So I have a few questions. I'll start out with the equity allocation band is from 25 to 70%. What's the criteria that's used to determine where you land in that spectrum?
Michelle, you can help me get through it if I screw it up. But I'll take a run at it, Art, and then Michelle can help. What the council initially mandated was that we get to 25% investment in equity securities by, I think Michelle said April of this year. And we moved down that path as she described by investing $50,000 a month. As we went through it and thought about it, we said, gee, given the volatility of a stock investment, and Michelle provided this information, the stocks are sufficiently volatile that really, if you wanted to be sure to be at 25%, you should invest a little higher than that. You should shoot for 30% was actually the number we came up with. And that would get you, that way you would be assured under most scenarios of being in excess of the 25% mandate that we were given. And so that's kind of how we came. Then the math of how we were investing kind of dictated, we went up a little bit from that 30% that the formula would have dictated to 40%. And thought that that was a good way to achieve balance. We haven't gone any higher than that until we get more comfortable with kind of this level and how it's performing and where we're at. So let me, before you ask a follow-up question, let Michelle tell you if I screwed up that explanation or if she would add anything to it. Michelle?
Bill, no, great explanation. And lastly, I think Art, to answer your question directly, so in the investment policy statement, we have the range, as you referred to, but our benchmark really is 40% in the equity. So, you know, if we did have, so we're going for the 40%, but obviously if we had the market went significantly up or significantly down from that 40%, you know, the returns, that's why the range is. But we don't expect to increase. We have to stay above the 25% allocation, but we don't expect to go to a 75% allocation to stock or the equity market for the foundation. That's not, nobody's been discussing that, but that's the reason for the range. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, so really 40% is your benchmark, and you're allowing for some volatility to not get too far away from that on either side. Is that a way to summarize that?
Yeah,
okay.
That was very succinct. Thank you.
Wish I'd have done it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
In terms of distribution, it's the 3-year rolling average. I'm assuming that means interest, dividends, and capital gains. Is that correct?
It is those 3 elements, Art. And the other thing, and we'll talk more about this next week if you want to join in, we've got an actual example. But the other element in there is we do count unrealized gains and losses on the equity portion of the portfolio.
So it's a mark to market.
With regard to equities, we do not make that adjustment on the bond side.
Right. Yeah, I understood. So is there a baseline or a corpus involved in making those distribution decisions?
We do. I'll run at it, and if I don't answer your question, I know you'll help me. But we are, one of the other rules that we have to follow is the foundation is not allowed to invade the corpus. So and we have a cushion. We track this now. And we have a cushion of about $200,000 between what we have earned and what we have given away. And we track that every quarter.
Okay. In terms of the bonds, I understand the bond situation quite well, and the Fed just changed their language. So, you know, the market's kind of adjusting to that right now. Are the bonds that you're rolling either from maturity or being called, are they being laddered? Is that portfolio being laddered, or are you shortening the duration and hence the convexity of that portfolio?
You want to take that one, Michelle?
That's a great question. Okay, when inheriting and walking in to start providing advice, all of the dollars were invested in bonds, individual bonds. And we had an issue. We had the ministry funds and the foundation funds, all the dollars were commingled in and held in these bonds. And there arose the pandemic and a need for potentially ministries being able to spend their money quickly prior to a bond potentially maturing and that cash becoming available. So we had to managing the cash flow over the last 12 months or since the beginning of the lockdown became very challenging. And so one of our goals, which we just accomplished about a month ago, was segregating ministry dollars from foundation dollars. That was that was actually a lot of what drove in our investing decisions over the last year. So that is completed. So the goal was to get that completed by the end of June. I know it's already been completed. Thank you, Lisa, for all your work on that, because getting those dollars segregated or delineated out. From there, the plan was actually to hold the bond portfolio to each bond to maturity as needed, and then as the dollars arose, we could invest into the equity and fulfill the council's directive. Since then, because of this other item regarding the ministry funds having to be segregated, what we've done, and I think we started really following this about a year ago, was matching our liability years with the correct type of investment. So, so for the dedicated ministry funds, right now everything's pretty much ultra short-term or short-term bonds or cash. That's where that's at because of the possible cash flow needs from the ministry funds. For foundation fund assets, we are just trying to match it. We know it's about 140,000 is about the amount of grants. We're giving out a lot more, I think, in 2021 because we did so well with the investments, but so it's about 140,000. So what we do is we put that into a file, and then we try to match the liability with a correct investment. So we did recently just make a purchase into, I think the average duration on this particular mutual fund, it's a bond mutual fund, and I think the average duration was about 6 or 7 years because we were just trying to match for those years. Beyond 10 years, we're staying in the equities generally, and so we're just trying to match up from there. So the short answer to your question is no. No, we're not changing the duration of the bond portion of the portfolio based upon the Fed announcement.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
I guess that wasn't really my question. So I guess the short answer to your question is that because of both short-term and long-term needs, you're shortening the duration of the bond portfolio overall in general. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, let me try to think. The Isaac bonds are, of course, shortening over time just because we're going through time, and so those maturity dates are coming up. We did make that one investment, $160,000 went into the 6 to 7 year duration time period. So
and that's a fund. Is that a fund, a Vanguard fund?
It's actually it's a BlackRock fund.
Okay.
Alpha Core Strategy. I can find that ticker symbol if you'd like.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
It's just generally, because several years ago, the average duration, I mean, it was more of a laddered portfolio, and it sounds like everything that's being rolled is being rolled into somewhat shorter maturities than it used to be. Which is fine. I mean, I understand that the bond market has structurally changed in the last couple of years. It's kind of broken actually, but okay. Moving on. I'm assuming the Vanguard funds, those are all institutional, right? With the lower expense rate fees.
We did use the lowest expense rate, lowest share class available.
Yeah. Okay.
Cheapest share class.
And last, I think it's my last question. Sorry for hogging the time, but the equity allocation, how is that determined?
That was determined using just a risk modeling. It was presented to the committee regarding the exposure to domestic versus international small caps to large caps. But that was just using, basic modeling in the FI360 toolkit, but it follows the basic principles of a balanced portfolio for equities, of course.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Art. Those were great questions.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions? Okay. Well, that's fine, and I appreciate the questions, Art, especially the ones you asked. Those were really good. So, so I'll summarize then, and we'll meet our objective of being done by 1 o'clock, I think. So the last couple of things for me to say are just kind of reminders. We are continuing the celebration of our 50th anniversary. There are 2 formal events still left. There's also the last lunch and learn. But the two formal events that we haven't seen yet, the 3-minute grant competition, will be starting a little bit later this summer. We'll get some information up on the website for that. But I think if you've been following in the epistle, you know that we're giving, it's a new opportunity for us. Usually we accept grant applications on a written form, and it's rather lengthy. And we are dedicating a certain amount of money to give out little smaller grants, but only requiring a 3-minute video that describes the need of the organization and how they would put the money to use, and how what they are doing corresponds to the mission of Augustana. So it's a bit of an experiment for us, but we're interested to see how it works and what kind of response we get. And part of why we're talking about it in this session is, if you know an organization or you're part of an organization that you think might be deserving of funds and kind of consistent with the mission of Augustana, please encourage them to look into this and participate if they think it's something that might benefit them. And then the last thing, the true celebration, will be in November. We have our 50th anniversary gala, Friday, November 5th, if you want to hold that date on your calendar. Hopefully it'll be an in-person event, but we'll see what happens with the virus and whether or not we're safe to do that. But we're working on the planning right now, and hopefully it'll be a really nice event and an appropriate celebration of 50 years for the foundation. And then, as I said before, the next Lunch and Learn is next Wednesday at noon. Tim Garrington, it's Dr. Tim Garrington who has rounds that day. So hopefully he will be joining me at noon, and we'll go through this. Otherwise, we'll have to ad-lib it a little bit, but we'll work our way through it. So again, thank you everybody for attending today. Lisa and Michelle, thank you so much for your expertise and for your willingness to do this. And with that, I'll bid y'all a nice day. And again, thank you for attending. Take care.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.